we're going to start with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commands and commands us to engross ourselves in words of Torah. All right. So here we are on our timeline, a little chart, and this is the last chapter right here. And we've gone through all of the stuff. I think has been a pretty interesting study so far. Are there any comments or questions that anyone might have before we get cranking on this today? Anything from the past lessons that we had? Just if you have a question, I got everybody muted, but all you got to do is just unmute yourself and say anything that you want to say. Okay, no comments, no questions. Here we get started. It said, then Joshua assembled all the tribes of Israel to Shechem and summoned Israel's elders, heads, judges, and officials. So they presented themselves before God. Then Joshua said to all the people, thus says Adonai, God of Israel, from ancient times your fathers, Terah, the father of Abraham, and the father of Nahor, lived beyond the river and worshipped other gods. Okay, beyond the river, that was the Euphrates, of course. And so this address, this speech that Joshua is giving, says to all of Israel. Of course, you're not going to get all of Israel. This is, again, is one of those literary things that is not meant to be taken totally literally, because obviously they're not going to get to 2 million people to come to Shechem. So this is addressed to all Israel, meaning to the representatives of all Israel. And then they spell that out: the elders, heads, judges, and officials. The same sequence of people that we saw earlier in chapter 23 when Joshua was addressing the people. And so then they presented themselves before God. Now that would mean that generally speaking, when you went into Joshua and they were talking about they presented themselves before the Lord, or they divided up the land before the Lord, and so forth, that meant that they were at the tabernacle, and the high priest would be there with his Urim and Thummim, and that they would be right there at the Ark of the Covenant, and God's presence was there. And so that's what it would mean, generally speaking, when they talk about the being before the presence of the Lord. And so we have a kind of a little bit of a question here. The original language here in the Hebrew says that they were at Shechem. Then in the translation of the Septuagint, when the Bible was translated into Greek, the Septuagint calls it Shiloh, and there's definitely a disconnect there. And I went back and looked at the original Hebrew, and the original does indeed say Shechem. Now, if they presented themselves before God, that would possibly mean that they took the Ark of the Covenant and carried it to up to Shechem, and had it and presented it there, and then that's what they would say before the Lord. There are two ancient Jewish commentators. There was Barbanel and Rabbi Kim Kimke, who both of them say that the ark was brought from Shiloh to Shechem, and that's what that's what really makes the most sense. Then Shechem has a lot of history with the Jewish people, and certainly by that time, and the place that this speech, the theme of this speech, it would have been much more appropriate to do this at Shechem than it would have been at Shiloh. And so then we see here that Joshua, okay, he begins his speech kind of like a lot of the Middle Eastern speeches that we've studied in the past, that they will begin with ancient history and work their way down to where you are right now, that sort of thing. And so that's kind of what he's doing, and what he does there by giving this history is that it gives it context, it gives gravity, I guess, to their speech and to his speech, and it also it kind of brings in the divine nature, or it verifies, it gives validity to the divine nature of the promise that God had made to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob of the land, the promise of the land. So I mean, it's been it's been. Let's see, if you look at the dates, 700 or 800 years between the time of Abraham and now, when they're going to they have possessed the land. So certainly it's 400 years there in Egypt, and then a couple of hundred years before that with Abraham and so forth. So it's been a while that they've been looking for this land, this promise that was given to them. All right, now here's my, how I am with my maps and everything, and so here is Shechem right there, pretty much in the middle of the country. And Shiloh, of course, is down here. It's not showing it down, but it's not too far. It's down here someplace. And so this is, you'll see these dotted lines here. That's where people try to, they say they call that the West Bank or the occupied territories. I just call it Israel. And so anyway, that's where Shechem is. It is the modern city of Nablus is where Shechem is. Okay, and what is Shechem famous for? This is one where Jacob came and he dug a well, and here on the left hand side you see the well. And from these pictures were taken in the 1800s. Okay, both of these two pictures were taken in the 1800s, and you can see, I mean, just the area around it is pretty barren and not a whole lot there. And then here's what the well looks like today, Jacob's well. It is there's an Eastern Orthodox, a Greek Orthodox church built around it and over it, and there you can kind of see, if any of you have ever been to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, you'll recognize the imagery here with all of the icons and that sort of the paintings and so forth. That's the sort of stuff that you'd see in Jerusalem in that Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So, but that's what Jacob's well looks like today. All right. So then Joshua goes ahead with his speech here. He says, "Then I took your father Abraham from beyond the river and led him through the entire land of Canaan, and multiplied his offsprings. I gave him Isaac. Then to Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau. To Esau I gave Mount Seir." To possess it, it is as his own, but Jacob and his children went down to Egypt. So I sent Moses and Aaron, and I plagued Egypt with what I did in its midst, and afterward I brought you out. Okay, so again, he's going along with this chronology and just bringing in the context and a little bit of history and so forth that really does give him some credence to the divine promise, because here it is. He says the land that was given to Abraham and then unto Isaac and Jacob and Esau. And Joshua makes a distinction here between Jacob and Esau, that the land of Israel, of course, we say that Esau he's the progenitor, he's the ancestor of the Arab people, and Jacob, of course, is the ancestor of the Jewish people. So it specifically says that Esau was given land. It was outside of the land of Israel. So what we call the land of Israel today, that he had his own inheritance, as it were. And so anything that talks about a claim of people back now into the Arabs or whoever, that Israel is rightfully theirs. No, this land was given by God to Israel, to the Hebrew people, 3,000 years ago. So now, one of the things that when Joshua is giving this account, a lot of the people, perhaps these leaders, we don't know their age, but they could very well have been not in Egypt, because everyone that was over the age of 20 had died in the wilderness, except for Joshua and Caleb. And so anyone else that by this time, if they were 20, then they would have been 40 years in the wilderness, so that'd make them 60, and then there would be another something like 14 years after that, so that would make them crowding, that'd make it about 74, 75, something like that. So, possibly a good bit of these people were not in Egypt. We don't know, but they would have to be very, very old. They would have a minimum of or they would have to been, I guess a maximum of 74. So if you had people that were 5 years old, and then you add another almost 60 years on, so that'd be 65, something like that. So 60 to 65. So anyway, there were a lot of these princes and the elders and leaders and so forth. We don't know their age, but they could very well have not been in Egypt. So, and then he says again, he's talking about coming out of Egypt. I brought your fathers out of Egypt. When you came to the sea, the Egyptians pursued your fathers to the Sea of Reeds with chariots and horsemen. But when they cried out to Adonai, he put darkness between you and them. You and the Egyptians, he brought the sea upon them, and it covered them, and your eyes saw what I did to the Egyptians. Then you stayed in the wilderness for a long time. Okay, so here you've got both things here. You've got, he says, I brought your fathers out of Egypt, and I think the word there in Hebrew, abatachem, that's there, and then here, fathers to the Sea of Reeds. Again, talking about your fathers, and that connects the generations, as it were, the ones that came out of Egypt with those that were standing there before Joshua right there at that time. And because he didn't say, when you cried out to Adonai. But then the next line, he says, between you and the Egyptians. So that kind of plays into what we do even today when we do our Passover Seder. We speak in terms that says that all of us were, that we take on the identity, and that it was us that came out of Egypt too. So when they say that, and your eyes saw that what I did to the Egyptians, then it may or may not have been an eyewitness thing, but certainly something that the fathers would have told to the children. And at any rate, even if they were not at the Red Sea and all of those kind of things, they saw miracles on a daily basis in the wilderness. And they would have seen the miracle of crossing the Jordan River, and the walls of Jericho falling, and the other miracles that occurred during the conquest of Canaan. So, and then when he's talking about a long, long time, the wilderness wandering, we say wandered in the desert for 40 years. No, it wasn't 40 years. It was they were out of Egypt before they came into Israel, was about 40 years, but the wandering actually lasted about 38 and a half years, because it was a little over a year after getting to Sinai that God says, okay, time to pack up and head to the promised land, and let's send out spies. And we know how the spy network worked. They came back with a bad report, and so God said, okay, you're going to wander around every day for one year for every day that you were out there searching, but I'll give you a break with Joshua and Caleb, because those two guys were men of a different spirit, and they will get to live. So are there any comments or questions at this point? Anybody got anything that they would, an observation perhaps? Anything? Okay. If you do, again, just unplug your mute button and talk away. All right, so then starting again with verse 8, then I brought you to the land of the Amorites who were living beyond the Jordan. Though they fought against you, I gave them into your hand, and you possessed their land, and I destroyed them from before you. Then Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, rose and fought against Israel. He even sent and called for Balaam, a son of Beor, to curse you. But I refused to listen to Balaam, and instead he had to keep blessing you. Thus I delivered you from his hand. Okay. Of course, all of this stuff here is Joshua telling this in the word that, these are the words that God is putting on him. So he's basically just a mouthpiece from God. So, obviously it wasn't Joshua that did these things. It was God himself. Joshua was always very, very quick to tell people, no, it wasn't me. It was Adonai who caused all these things to happen. So he recounts this victory against the Amorites. Of course, they were a pretty formidable force at the time, and they came up there and they were defeated. The Amorites were defeated, and this is the land then that Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh took over on the eastern side of the Jordan River. And very, very nice, good, fertile land. Even today, there's lots of orchards and crops in some of that land. Now, that was a straight up battle against enemies. Then we get to the story of Balak and Balaam, and that represented a different kind of a battle. Okay, here, a different kind of warfare. This type of warfare, the protagonists were invoking their gods, as it were, and they wanted their deities to curse Israel. And the relationship that Balaam had with Adonai is a strange relationship, because he did have some kind of a relationship there, to where he could talk to God, God would talk to him, but in the end he was not a a follower of God. And so I think at this point we could say that he was an instrument, he was a tool that God used for his own purposes. All right, so and it says there that God would just not allow Balaam to curse Israel. Of course, we know that then later on he says, well, we may not be able to beat them straight on in battle, but that what we can do is we can defeat them undercover. Okay, that's kind of a play on words, that we'll send our women to entice their men, and then they will turn against their God, and so then they won't, they will be defeated that way. Well, it didn't work out exactly like that, because then they were, Israel went on to victories and so forth. So Joshua keeps on going. He says, Then you crossed over the Jordan and came to Jericho, but the men of Jericho fought against you, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, but I delivered them into your hand. And then I sent the hornet before you, and it drove them out before you, the two kings of the Amorites, not by your sword or your bow. I gave you a land on which you had not labored, and cities that you had not built, and you have settled in them, vineyards and olive groves that you had not planted, that you are now eating. So the Battle of Jericho there is the only one that's mentioned. There were quite many battles that they fought in the conquest of Israel, because it took 7 years to win the all of the land of Israel and take over what they did. Anyway, they didn't drive everybody out, but anyway, there were lots of battles, and they only mentioned Jericho, and probably is because it was the first victory after coming into the land. And also Jericho was a significant city, and it was vital to the region. It was on a trade route. It was a very important piece of real estate, militarily, economically, psychologically. It was a very important piece of real estate, because once Jericho fell, then he says, I sent the hornet. Well, there's no place in the Bible where it talks about the enemy being overcome by a swarm of hornets and being stung or anything like that. So the hornet was just likely a metaphor for terror. Give me 1 second here, and let me get the dog is wanting to come in here. Pat's dogs are very insistent. They want to be in here with me because the TV's going in there, and they don't particularly like the TV. So anyway, the hornet was likely a metaphor for terror. You remember when Israel was going through the land, and the Bible says that God sent a terror or a dread of Israel before them, so that all of the kings and the various entities there in Israel just dreaded. They knew that they would be defeated no matter what. They were going to be defeated, and so this again is a metaphor for just terror and the dread. All right, so anyway, going ahead now. Therefore, fear Adonai, worship him in sincerity and in truth. Get rid of the gods that your father had worshipped beyond the river and in Egypt, and worship Adonai. If it seems bad to you to worship Adonai, then choose for yourselves today whom you will serve, whether the gods that your fathers worshipped that were beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will worship Adonai. All right, so this is, of course, one of the most famous sayings, I guess, in our scriptures, in certainly in Joshua, and even arguably so. It's one of the most recognized ones in the Bible. The idea, but as for me and my household, we will worship Adonai, or in the King James version, I think is. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Okay, so Joshua is telling these people, about get rid of your idols, your gods, and so forth. Now, a lot of these people may have been hanging on to these, to their, to their defense. I would say that these people were hanging on to their idols. Because they were, they could have been like gold and silver and decorated with jewels and stuff like that, because some of these things were real works of art, and they were worth a lot of money, perhaps. And so they kept them, and maybe they just looked at them kind of like what we would do today, looking at a piece of art, or you go to the museums and you see the statues and the various things that people used to worship, and we just look at them and say, okay, yeah, nice artwork there, but it's nothing but a rock. So maybe so. I'll say that in their defense, but at the same time, if that was all that valuable, then melt it down or sell it or do whatever and get the money and run. So, but he goes on that said, get rid of the gods that your fathers worship beyond the river and in Egypt. So here he's saying, he is covering the full gamut of these ones. He says, whether they be the ancient gods from 400 or 500 years ago, 600 years ago, whatever, when Abraham was coming down here, those gods and those little statues and idols and so forth from the Chaldean region and so forth, whether they're those old ones or in Egypt, the ones that you got down there with the Ra and Isis, and so many of the other ones that were a combination of different animals and so forth. Whether it was that, or even the ones that you're finding now in Canaan, because they had a different set of little g gods in Canaan. So Joshua was saying it doesn't matter whether they were the real old ones or the ones that you had in Egypt or these newer ones that you're seeing now in Canaan. He said, get rid of them. You don't need them. We don't want them. And so I think in a way he's also saying here that get rid of the gods, get rid of the worship, and even to the point of, again, a subtle reminder that they need to get rid of the people that are still in that land, because they had not completely run everybody out that was not Hebrew. And so again, it's a kind of an admonition, a reminder from Joshua, hey, get rid of these enticements. And so, but Joshua's now, he's making the bold statement. This is total commitment to the Lord. He says, but for me and my household, we will worship Adonai. So, his deal was that, I can't force you to obey God. I can't force you to worship Adonai, but, because it's got to be your own choice. But my choice is I'm going to be serving the Lord. Okay. So let's go ahead. Let's see. And then the people answered and said, far be it from us that we should forsake Adonai to worship other gods. For it was Adonai our God who brought us and our fathers up from the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage, and who did those great signs in our sight and preserved us all along the way that we traveled and among all the peoples through whose midst we passed. It was Adonai who drove out from before us all the peoples, all the Amorites that lived in the land. Therefore, we also will worship Adonai, for he is our God. All right, so the people, they jump right in there, and they're very, very quick to affirm, no, we will be serving God. It says, far be it from us that we should forsake or turn our backs on Adonai to worship other gods. And then they give their reasons behind it, because it was God who brought them out of Egypt, and from all this bondage and so forth. And then we had all of these miracles, sights and wonders that just were on every page there when they crossed the Red Sea, and then the Egyptian army drowned in the Red Sea. And then, going on to Sinai, the various things that happened, it just, time after time after time, God performed miracles for the children of Israel. And these people had seen that. They saw all of that, and they says, yes, we saw all of that stuff. He kept us alive during all of our travels, and the people, when we went through their land, God protected us. We weren't wiped out, and, so on and so forth. And says, yes, because of all of that, we will also serve Adonai, for he is our God. And these people, they were being very truthful at that point, and we'll find out a little later on what that actually meant. So they're giving their reasons, that because of the history, they can go back and use that history for their own benefit too. And so he said, yeah, because he did this, and this, we saw all these miracles. Yeah, we're going to serve the Lord too. So then going on, Joshua said to the people, you will not be able to worship Adonai, for he is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not pardon your transgression and your sins. If you forsake Adonai and worship foreign gods, then he will turn and do you harm and consume you after he has done good to you. All right, so Joshua, kind of looks like to me that Joshua, kind of like Moses before him, he didn't have a whole lot of confidence in the ability of the Israelites to worship God like they should. That they had a long history of forgetfulness. God gives them the the quail and the manna and the water and all that, and then it's not very long until they're back to kvetching about this or that or the other. And they're still wanting to get their their leeks and garlics and melons and onions and so forth in Egypt. Just boggles the mind how they could let their stomachs think for them when they totally block out all of the bondage and the situation in Egypt. Okay, and so Joshua then he reminds them, of course, of God's high standard. He says, God is a holy God, and he says you're not going to be able to worship Him all the way, and He's a jealous God, meaning don't get into those idols and turn your back on Him, because He's not going to pardon that. And it's really a strong admonition to the people, because God certainly is a merciful God. He's a patient God, but at the same time, He's not going to put up with sin and living in sin for forever. And so if you look in verse 20 there, it says, if you forsake Adonai, the word key there for if you forsake Adonai, it can also be in context either way. I mean, you could just as easily have said here, when you forsake Adonai and worship foreign gods, then he will turn. Okay, it's not an if, but it's a when. You're going to do it. I know you're going to do it, because I know you guys. I've been traveling around with you for 65, 70 years now, and you guys, I just know it. That's what you're going to do. And so he's just trying to warn them against about themselves. I guess it would be that it would be a warning to each of the Israelites about, hey, your own nature. You guys are going to turn against God, and when you do, stand by for heavy rolls, because God is going to do you harm. He'll consume you. And indeed, we saw that with the Assyrian exile, where they came in and took out the elite of the northern tribes, and then the northern tribes were just kind of assimilated, not totally, but partially. And then the Judah and Benjamin, and of course the Levites were conquered, and they went into the Babylonian exile. And so again, for a time there, the land of Israel was pretty much empty of Jewish people, especially during the Babylonian exile, because they took out almost everybody. The Assyrian exile, they only took out the elites, the highly educated, the wealthy, the royalty, as it were, even though there was no claim to royalty from I mean, they had no legitimate claim up there. They just made themselves kings. So Josh was telling the truth here, and it was prophetic, because that's exactly what did eventually happen. So again, let's go ahead and stop here just a second. Anybody got any comments or questions so far? All right. But the people said to Joshua, no, for we will worship Adonai. So Joshua said to the people, you are witnesses to yourselves that you have chosen for yourselves Adonai to worship him. They said, we are witnesses. Yep, we're going to do it. And now, therefore, get rid of the foreign gods that are in your midst and incline your hearts to Adonai, King, or God of Israel. All right, so what are we seeing here? Now the people are, again, very adamant. Oh, no, we're going to be faithful. We know we're going to be faithful. So, so Joshua said, okay, you know, you're a witness to yourselves. Of course, there wasn't anybody else around to witness it other than for themselves, and that you have chosen for yourselves Adonai to worship him. So basically, he's setting up a kind of a perjury trap for them. You know, they are witness of their own oath, and they're taking this oath, and then it takes a couple of generations, and they're in the tank again. So that's just Joshua could see it, and indeed that's what happened. He says, now get rid of your foreign gods that are in your midst. Again, here I think is a real strong indicator, an admonition to the people: get rid of those foreign gods that are in your midst. Maybe not in your possession, in your midst, and meaning drive those pagans out of the land. Get rid of them. Push them over into wherever they're going to go. Send them up to up to Damascus, Syria, or someplace, or push them over into what's now Jordan, or wherever it is. Get rid of them. And it says, incline your hearts to Adonai, God of Israel. So, just how many ways can Joshua say to the people that they need to I guess the word that's coming into me is circumcise their hearts, not only just your body, but your hearts to serve the Lord. So, going on, then the people said to Joshua, we will worship none but Adonai our God, and we will obey none but his voice. And so Joshua cut a covenant with the people that day and set for them a statute and an ordinance in Shechem. Okay, so this is now the third time that the representatives, the people's representatives there say, no, we will serve the Lord. 3 times. It's kind of like, when Peter denied the Lord for 3 times, and then Yeshua asked Peter, said, do you love me 3 times? So here they are affirming their commitment to God for, the 3 times. And then it says that Joshua cut a covenant with the people on that day, set for them a statute and an ordinance in Shechem. So cutting a covenant, what does that entail? Well, I think I've got a picture here. All right, this is coming back from going back over to the Abrahamic covenant, where they cut these animals. And generally speaking, what they would do, they would cut the animals in half. Maybe not 2 animals. They'd just cut an animal in half and kind of lay it open. And then the 2 people who were going into covenant with each other, and it could be actually 2 countries, and they're just having their kings or their representatives to do the covenant. But they would walk between these carcasses, and the imagery there is that, and kind of the underlying thought behind there is that, may we be like these carcasses here if we break the covenant, if we go back on our word, may we be like these dead animals that are on either side of us. So that's what the idea of cutting a covenant meant, and that's why they do call it cutting a covenant. There was the shedding of blood. I mean, even in the idea of circumcision, they call it the Brit Milah is basically you're becoming a son of the covenant, and there is the shedding of blood there. And so, again, it all kind of comes together, plays together there. Now, there is a little bit of a thing here that we really don't know how that is. So Joshua cut a covenant and set for them a statute and an ordinance in Shechem. Now, could it be that that Joshua ended up adding something to Moses, the Torah of Moses? I would think not. I think that he may have made for them some kind of an ordinance, a rule, or something like that for them to follow that would have been extra biblical. Because I'm not real sure that Joshua would have dared, or he would not have presumed that he had the authority to add to the Torah of Moses. And nothing is ever referenced anywhere in there that's, oh yeah, and just like that statute and ordinance that Joshua gave us at Shechem. No, it's never, nothing like that has ever been mentioned. So let's go ahead and then Joshua wrote these words. Let's see. Joshua wrote these words in the scroll of the Torah of God. Also, he took a great stone and set it up there under the oak that was by the sanctuary of Adonai. Joshua said to all the people, "Behold, this stone will be a witness to us, and for it has heard all the words of Adonai, which he has spoken to us. So it will be a witness to you, lest you deny your God." Joshua then dismissed the people, each to his own inheritance. All right, so here's a stone in Shechem that they found, and it's just kind of sticking up there, kind of unusual around everything else. Is this the stone that Joshua set up? We don't have a clue. It was beside some temple that was there, but the temple, I don't think, some people, they call it a temple of Balaam, and so we don't know. But anyway, this is a type, this stone here that I'm showing you. It's a type of thing that people in those ancient times would have done, and they would say, okay, let this stone be our witness, which is, really, that's kind of strange that they would not do idolatry and fall down and worship this rock or something like that. But then they're saying, okay, this stone right here, may it be our witness. And it'd be more likely, just the idea of, see this stone right here, this is going to be a memorial that this is what was said on this particular day. So anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting, just seeing that that stone that was there in Shechem. Is it the same one? Who knows? I wouldn't know, and nobody really knows. Some say no, this is part of Baal and that worship, and others say, well, no, it could have been. So we really don't know. All right. So then let's see okay. Now it came to pass after those things that Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of Adonai, died at the age of 110 years. So they buried him in the territory of his own portion in Timnath-Serah, which is in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. Israel worshiped Adonai all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua and had known all the work of Adonai that he had done for Israel. So what we see here is that it came to pass, Joshua, okay, he passed away. He was 110 years old, and so they buried him right in his inheritance, and said that Israel then worshiped God, and they stayed faithful to God as long as the as long as Joshua lived, and then as long as the elders who were there that outlived Joshua. So for another generation, they served the Lord, mostly because the people who were in charge had seen these miracles, and for themselves, they had witnessed these things. They had lived through these things. So at that point, they're saying, okay, yeah, they could kind of keep everybody in line and so forth. But then once the leadership got away from that, then that was that was it. The people started worshiping other things and forsaking God, and it's we see the same sort of thing today, that when the leadership gets their head going some direction that is not right, many times the people follow. You can see that all throughout history, that in Nazi Germany, for one thing, as very few people, a small percentage, like 7% of the people, were ever Nazis, but they turned the entire country into a war killing machine, and so that's why it's important to impart the words of Torah. That's why the admonition from the Hafta, for us to teach our children and speak to them about this sort of thing on a daily basis, several times a day. When you get up in the morning, when you're doing your stuff during the day, wherever you're going during the day, and before you go to bed at night. Again, keep the words of Torah constantly before you and for your children. So it's good words to live by. And I think with that, let's see, I think I've got some pictures here. Yeah, here's Joshua's tomb. Now, it's kind of strange. Okay, the Arabs, they control the land up there around this thing, and so on the 22nd of Nisan every year, they allow the Jews. Well, they don't really allow it, but the Israeli government forces them into allowing the Jews that want to come up here, and there's thousands of them that do it, at around midnight. And the Israeli army gets around there, and police, and they just block off this area, and then the Jews can come in there and pray at Joshua's tomb. And so it's kind of interesting, because then just within the last couple of years, the people who call themselves the Arabs there, that live there, and they call themselves Palestinians, or whatever it is that they're saying, they came and they put the torch to Joshua's tomb. And I don't really know how you can burn up stone walls and stuff like that. But anyway, anything that they could, they tried to destroy the thing. It's just plain old, meanness, trying to destroy another Jewish memorial site. But I think they kind of put the word out, got it all secured fairly quickly, and it wasn't permanently damaged. All right, so going on, Joseph's bones, which Bnei Israel had brought up from Egypt, they buried in Shechem in the parcel of ground that Jacob had bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of silver. It became the inheritance of the children of Joseph. And then Eleazar, son of Aaron, died when they buried him, and they buried him in Gibeah, which had been given to Pinchas, his son, in the hill country of Ephraim. Okay, so in fact, here is Joseph's tomb in Shechem. All right, it's a real place. It definitely people have recognized it down through the years, for the last 3,500 years. And there it is again, another picture of it. This is a picture of the tomb of Eleazar, the high priest. And so that was, again, one of those recognizable things that the land was given to Pinchas, the son of, or the grandson of Aaron. And so, yeah, it's a real place. It's a real live place today. So, and I think that's my last slide, last picture. So, all right, are there any comments or questions that we may have tonight? Da, 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 okay, now this concludes the book of Joshua, and then next week we will begin a study of Judges, and we're just going to go right down through the history of Israel and a chronological order, a study of what was going on from the time that these generations that didn't know Joshua and that didn't know, had not crossed the Red Sea and all that, from that point on down, roughly, I guess, until we'll probably go on down through till the Maccabean period, and it'll take us months to get through all of that. But I think it'll be an interesting study for you, because certainly you didn't learn this in Israeli History 101 when you were in school.